This Newspeak is designed to manipulate people. It's all about power and money, as everything amongst humans are. You want to understand motivation, follow the power and follow the money.
You know how the best discussions you have are usually over whiskey and it wades into all this other stuff? My buddy Ed Warner and I were talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it was mind-blowing. So I want to recreate a little bit of that here. Ed, you're a scientist, you're a businessman, you're give a lot of money.
Philanthropist.
I was going to say philanderer, but I don't think your wife Jackie would like that. And all these things, and you interact in a lot of different worlds that DEI is really crucial. In academia, and what you do in charity, what you do in business. Isn't DEI to have diversity in any organization? It's a worthy goal. The organization gets better, society gets better when we have people from different ethnic backgrounds, different genders, different gender identities. That way we all get to learn from each other, and it makes things better.
I grew up in a wonderful culture back east, around New York City, where we had enormous ethnic and religious and racial diversity. And I was raised to look at every individual as an individual, not seeing them as part of a group, whether they were Jews or Catholics, whether they were Japanese or Chinese, whether they were whites or blacks. We called it color blindness. I took up diversity at the earliest age, and the diversity that I went after was women in science. I have mentored and I have fought the glass ceiling for women scientists all of my professional careers, multiple careers. And yet, in the current definition of diversity, women don't count. There was a study done.
Lesbian women count, and black women count.
Hold on. There was a study done that proved that geology was the least diverse science because it had the lowest percentage of African Americans, which is true. We don't have very many. And yet, we have gone from 0% women to 40%, but that doesn't count because the political attitudes towards diversity are now about divisiveness.
Let's focus on the word colorblind, because as I've been taught by people who are experts in diversity, there's no such thing as colorblind, that your racist tendencies still pop out when you are colorblind. That seeing the world and having color blindness as the goal is the wrong way to do it. Instead, we need to be able to identify everyone's subculture and then subculture in that. We need to be able to put people in different boxes and understand what makes that box special, different, and all the incredible, wonderful things we can learn from somebody in that box.
That is taking a concept and removing the definition of it. So first we have to go back and say, define our terms. What we meant by color blindness was seeing a person strictly as an individual, not as a Jew or a Catholic, not as an Italian or a Black or a Puerto Rican, but just as a human being. There can't be anything better than that. I do not have to acknowledge that your family was oppressed in Italy, or my mother's family were murdered in Germany, or this other person's family, 7 generations removed, were slaves, just because I can tell that that person with dark skin, or that person who looks Jewish or looks Italian, in my opinion, Jews and Italians look alike. I don't know. I grew up amongst them, so I can't tell them apart. Or Asians. What about Asians? Asians do not want to be lumped into this type of category of victimhood. Why? Because there are groups of people who know they're going to be discriminated against and have whipped the butts of everybody else who may have discriminated against them by succeeding.
Do you know the hate crime that you committed during your little screed there?
Tell me.
You used the term black, but you used it as a noun, not as an adjective. And this year, apparently, that is racist, as I found out. So it can be a black community, it can be a black man, but if this person is a black or they are blacks, now that is racist. And it's hard for me to keep up with this the older I get, of which words need to be used at which point. So, as you know, I've got a Downs son. You nodded your head. You racist hater. I do not have a Down son because I've been told it has to be person first. I have a son with Downs. That's the same thing as people of color. My son doesn't have any normal friends because normal is not a word that we can use. He now has typical friends. And I get so aggravated because this newspeak changes at a faster and faster pace, and the offensiveness that someone is offended by this happens faster and faster. And I just can't keep up with it.
This newspeak is designed to manipulate people. It's all about power and money, as everything amongst humans are. You want to understand motivation, follow the power and follow the money. And that's a problem with society because they don't see the undercurrents. So let me give you just an example of being colorblind, okay? And this example got me actually thrown off a board by a DEI consultant.
A consultant?
Yes, because she happened to be Japanese, and I thought I could actually connect with her, which was a classic mistake that I made. And I went up and I said, listen, I just want to explain what I mean by colorblind. I was at Colorado State University, an undergraduate, and I spot this beautiful girl, and I ask her out for a date. She was way out of my price range. I couldn't imagine she said yes to me. And we had this intellectual love affair where we stayed up night after night after night talking about ideas. She was so bloody beautiful. And finally, we started kissing, right? And we started an actual love affair, not just between our ears intellectually. And I explaining this to this consultant, this Japanese consultant. And I said, and this was really where I went totally astray. I said, 2 weeks into our relationship, I woke up in the morning and I looked at her and I said, Terry, there's something exotic about you. She was half Japanese. I never saw
You didn't know she was Japanese?
I saw a beautiful woman. I saw a beautiful mind. My brain was trained, so I didn't see that she was half Japanese.
All right, so you tell the story.
That is colorblindness.
All right, you tell the story as a way to explain your definition of colorblindness, that you fell in love with a person having no idea what their ethnic origin is. The consultant then said, I understand what you're saying. However, did she get the point?
She poked me in the arm, which, by the way, under the terms of the new generations, is called assault and battery. If I had dialed 911, she would have been arrested. But I'm an old guy that doesn't operate under those terms. I try to be okay with other people's types of acting out. And she said, as she poked me, it's because you're a powerful white man, which seems to be a hell of a racist statement in my mind. And this was overheard by 2 employees of this organization. And I went away thinking, that didn't go well. So that afternoon, I emailed the head of this organization.
Right.
And I said, I think I've messed up. I would like to meet with those 3 women, 2 employees and this consultant, and apologize. And I was apologizing because I had sensed that they didn't like it. not because I was wrong.
Because from my point of view, mind you, I'm ruder than most people. I see nothing wrong with what you said.
I work in collaborative processes. I bring people together who think they're the enemies of each other, oil executives and environmentalists, to work together on projects. I've done this successfully for 25 years now. I worked in my own field, and I never had an employee. I joint ventured, in other words, worked collaboratively for money and for science and engineering, but I did this process for a long time. So I could sense that maybe I had overstepped the way I described this, and I'd love to be able to just calm it down. I sensed something, right? And I wasn't allowed. I wasn't allowed to talk to them. I wasn't allowed anything. And then, evil Ed, I went to East Africa to work on a baseload study of coral reef science that I paid for off the coast of Africa. I'm the guy who put up the money. I was part of the team, brought in the most brilliant scientists, right? I come back a month later, and I'm invited to the chairwoman of this foundations and the head of this organization to her mansion. It's the biggest mansion in Denver. She married a lot of wealth, thank you very much. And they sit me down and they said, you have to resign from the board. We'll make it quiet. And this woman who understood me not in the least said, oh, Ed, you've done such great stuff. We'll throw a big party for you as a going away party. And I was furious. She didn't know who I am. My reputation in all of my careers has been, I'm totally ethical.
So let me recap this. Let me recap this.
Lied, cheated, or stolen from anybody, and everybody knew it. And yet she was telling me, oh, ethics don't count.
Let me see if I understand the sin. The sin was you were trying to talk to somebody that this organization that you're on the board of hired to lecture everybody about DEI, and you were trying to make a point, and you illustrated it in a way she didn't like, but it didn't sound hurtful, it didn't sound mean-spirited, it was just a story, and because of that, you were kicked off the board.
That's correct. That's DEI. That is
censorship. That is telling people to shut the hell up. I don't like what you have to say, and I will use the strong arm of coercion to make sure you speak the way I want to speak. You can say whatever you want, but you have to use my terminology, which means I've already won.
That's right. That's exactly what happened. I spoke from a personal experience. I wasn't telling anybody what to do. I wasn't telling anybody how to speak. I was relaying a personal experience that I thought she might connect with. Oops, was I wrong? So DEI actually stands for divisiveness. It pulls people apart.
I look at
exclusion. It lumps people into groups, right? And what is the I? I got a lot of different choices. Ignorance, idiocy. No, intimidation.
Oh, that's even better. That is absolutely.
DEI, divisiveness, exclusion, and intimidation. That's what has actually been going on.
So I think about Martin Luther King, his statement, I want to be judged on the content of my character, not the color of my skin. And I hold this up as kind of the ultimate colorblindness. This is the goal that our nation strives for. And now I see not just a society, a whole industry that says, no, you're not what you create. You're not who you've made yourself to be. You are your skin color. You are your genitals. You are who you have sex with. Now, that's how we're going to define you. And you're telling somebody, you're telling a child, you are your color. You are your genitals. Not what you do, not what you achieve, not what you change, not what you add to the world. This is your identity. Your diversity is not between your legs, not between your ears, it's between your legs. And that's just a terrible, defeating thing to teach a child. I think it's immoral.
And there are consequences. This institution that had, I would say, among its its administration, its employees, and yes, its board had the greatest morale of any institution I had ever worked with, went down the toilet completely. Morale was gone. If young women can demand that middle-aged white men, AKA their bosses, be fired because they're not using the proper language, that's a complete manipulation by people who don't have the competencies to do the job that their bosses are doing. And instead of learning from them and growing in their experience, they're actually defeating themselves along with the institution as a whole.
I despise the pronoun wars. I despise them for two reasons. One, it's coerced speech. You know, the First Amendment protects your right of free speech. It's not just your right to say what you want, it's to not say something you don't want to say. And in order to keep one's job or to stay in college and pass a class, you might be required to look at a man and refer to him as her. Now, I refuse to do that, which is fine because I have this job and I'm not going to get fired for telling the truth. But other people have to put up with this in the office. They're going to be sent to HR. They're going to be told they're going to lose their job. And they've got to make a moral decision, an ethical decision. Do I speak a lie? Do I go home and look at my kids and say, yeah, I go to work and I have to lie in order to keep this job so I can feed my family? Or do I tell the truth? You know, and I want that person, by the way, if that person thinks that he is a she, by all means, refer to yourself as she. I don't care. You have a right of free speech. I have a right of free speech. But to tell me I have to lie in order to feed my family is a definition of evil for me.
It's also utterly destructive of human culture. What do you think the Nazis did? They created their own speech to degrade the people that they were going to enslave. By the way, my mother's generation in Europe were not just murdered, and they weren't murdered by the Nazis. Oh, I shouldn't even say this, but I'm going to anyhow. They were murdered by Christians. Christian anti-Semitism for 500 years gave the National Socialists, by the way, don't say Nazis, they're National Socialists, and the other guys that they were trying to defeat, the communists, were international socialism. This is all about socialism. There isn't a left and a right. They're all packed in the same damn place. But they used anti-Semitism, developed by Jews killed Christ and things like that, as a political weapon. And they did it because the Jews were really weird. One side were the communists, their enemies in politics, and the other side were rich, and they could be stripped of their assets. And so they were used politically. And so if a black person said, you have to acknowledge that my ancestors were slaves, you know, by virtue of the color of my skin, let's say, why don't I say to them, excuse me, is your family Christian? And if it is, then your family killed my mother's family. Isn't that an equivalency? I don't want to say that to anybody, by the way. I don't use
Why not?
Why? Because of who I am. I'm a person that wants to get along with people. I mean,
it's not about getting along anymore. It's about being intimidated into silence.
Right, and I speak up. So here I am being politically incorrect on television, for goodness sake, because I'm willing to speak up.
Let me throw this one at you. The Bud Light boycott, whatever you want to call it, fascinated me, absolutely fascinated me. And here's why. When you're dealing with this coercion, this intimidation that is DEI, you can't speak up about it at work. You can't do it at college. You can't do it in social circles because you'll be shunned. There is this cost to it. Finally, Bud Light does something which is a tiny little infraction, if it is an infraction. All they're doing is trying to sell their beer to another market. Well, let's go to the trans market and do something that the trans market might like. That's it. They're trying to increase their market share. But we are so angry and so stifled outside of that, that the overreaction to it was, screw you, I can now vote anonymously. I'm at the grocery store, nobody knows if I'm pulling Budweiser or Coors, and that way, well, to hell with you guys, and it had nothing really to do with Bud Light, it had to do with this DEI, politically correct pronoun police crap that we are dealing with. And when people can vote on it quietly, I think it gave us an idea how people feel about free speech.
People are starting to vote with their pocketbook. And personally, I think that's a really great thing. You ought to be in charge of your own money if you don't feel like you're in charge of anything else going on. So you made one statement that I don't agree with. Bud Light did not do that commercial to gain access to a giant alphabet market. Sorry if I called them that, but there are too many letters in there for an old guy like me to actually spit out, because the market is insignificant and they don't drink Bud Light. Bud Light is drunk by wonderful blue-collar kinds of guys that I like to kick my feet up with, even though I wouldn't drink Bud Light if it was the last damn beer on earth. So what they did was they pandered to this political correctness and they got burned financially. And all of a sudden, people are starting to say, and this just happened in Pennsylvania, if you let Kamala Harris into a breakfast restaurant and you kick out half the people to make room for hers, and then 2 weeks later, Vance shows up and he's got 36 people want to see him in there, and they don't let him in on an excuse like they didn't have advance notice. And then people shut that restaurant down by refusing to buy their product. I think that's a good thing. Vote with your money and vote with your feet.
Let me
that could change things dramatically.
Let me I couldn't agree more. Let me throw out this word. It's a nasty word. I thought it used to be a good word, but it is a nasty word. Merit. That we strive for meritocracy. I think about sports being the ultimate meritocracy. I want a guy who can play that position this way better than anyone else can play that position. Tiger Woods wins because of meritocracy. But yet meritocracy has an evil connotation because it has to do with privilege. Now, I admit, I am privileged. I'm privileged to live in this nation. I'm privileged that I had two parents who cared about me, moved to Colorado because they wanted a better life for their kids, worked hard to get me through school. That is a privilege. But merit is a bad thing now. And I imagine that same DEI consultant, if you said, well, what about merit? I bet you wouldn't have liked that.
Well, I can't speak to what she would answer in that case, but I can tell you my own life experience and opinion, and that is that there are certain types of cultures, could be related to religion, it could be tribal, it could be strictly cultural, that teach their children that they are going to be discriminated against. Whether it's anti-Semitism or anti-Asian or anti-Black, it doesn't matter to me, whatever it is. And your job as a child is to prove them wrong. You're going to outcompete them. You're going to be the best in your field, whether it's playing a violin or being on Wall Street or being a scientist. You're going to be the best that you can be. There are books written about this kind of cultural attitude by parents transmitted to their kids. And so the
Asian community, I believe, has that attitude. Immigrants to this country from Asian nations, within one generation, their kids are millionaires. And it is a work ethic that we see. A statistic I heard, and we've talked about this before, that something like 80-something% of all first-generation millionaires are migrants to this nation. These are people who don't know how to speak the language, don't know the laws, don't know the customs, don't know the people, don't know the culture, and yet they see opportunity and create it.
I've been saying this for decades and decades now, John. You want to meet an American who absolutely understands and loves America, find a legal, brand new immigrant. And they will explain America to all these people who hate America because they're entitled. They're entitled Americans. They're entitled to their wealth on one hand, and they're entitled to their victimhood on the other hand. And it's caused a poison in our society. We need to be a meritocracy. So I'm a lunatic, John. 7 years ago, I'm at a fundraiser for a science museum, and I get introduced to this little Asian woman, and I listened to her name, and I said, "Oh, you're from a Vietnamese boat family, aren't you?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Oh my God, you're the Jews of Southeast Asia." And she took it as the compliment that it was meant. Why do I mean that? They come over here, they are impoverished, they're peasants, families, the first generation works 2 and 3 jobs each, mom and dad, and they expect their kids to excel, and the kids do. Does it create psychological problems for the kids sometimes? Sure it does. But I've lectured that when I grew up, it was obvious that Jews were the smartest people in America. The most physicists, the most violinists, the most whatevers.
The most
right?
Nobel Prize
Nobel Prize winners. It is not true. Not at all. Because if you look at the Westinghouse scholarships, 1962, 7 Jewish names, 1 Asian name, 1 WASP name, 1 other. 1982, 7 Vietnamese names, 1 Jewish name, 1 WASP name, 1 other. 2022, this is really interesting, 5 Indian with a dot names, 4 Nigerian names, no Jewish names, 1 other. What happened to Jews? They became rich, entitled people. So yes, there's entitlement, and it's bad for kids. Having drive and believing in the American dream of meritocracy is a great thing. Do you think I didn't notice that growing up, all the great violinists were Jews, and now they're all Japanese? I mean, it's a transformational experience, and it's based on their parents' belief that they're going to be discriminated against, and they're going to work their butts off to prove everybody wrong.
Won't you admit, though, meritocracy is a goal. It's not necessarily a reality. That there are people who have advantages compared to other people. They have networks of people who make it easier here. They have capabilities that it's not necessarily just because I'm working hard. I can still work hard in a free society and fail. But the equality is in this equality to try, to have the effort, to have the chance to do it. And I would never say, oh yeah, everybody starts off at the same place. There's no way that a rich kid, has to start off with somebody else. I might argue that the rich kid or the rich kid's kid over time is going to fail because it was handed to them. But for me, meritocracy is the goal. Color blindness is the goal. Have we reached it? Not necessarily. Will we ever reach it? Maybe not, but that's what we strive for.
Freedom is a goal. Liberty is a goal. Freedom of speech is a goal. All of these fabulous concepts are not, they're not an end product. They are a continuum of experience. There will never be the perfect society. We will never be perfectly free. We will never have a perfect meritocracy. Yes, there will be inherited rich. My son called them trustafarians. Yeah. And my son was a Buddhist monk, as you know. So he wasn't exactly a capitalist. But in his heart, he was a scientist and he was an observer of people. And he was my son. So just like your son, that is covered by the law of good enough. I'm not telling him how to live. I'm not telling him what religion to take up, right? What politics, to profess. He was given an open mind. His parents supported that kind of thing, and he became his own person. So that's what we should be looking for in this society.
When you look at the statistics, people from the Ivory Coast, are some of the most upwardly mobile Americans. They come here as first generations, and it's just amazing to see how they do. Now, I don't know how to put this. These people are Black. So in this world, in this country, which is systematically racist, somehow these Black-skinned people are able to excel in one generation or two generations to change their lives completely. Nobody wants to have the difficult conversation of what we have done to people of color when we have built the great society of the 60s, when we have said, fall into your victimhood, and let's be sure to keep you impoverished, but give you enough handouts to stay alive. The culture isn't there the same way that the immigrant culture is coming in. And they both have the same skin color.
Mm-hmm. And there was a subset of African American from the West Indies. And I knew a few of these characters who grew up in poverty, but mom and dad both worked jobs. So their parents were there, and their parents looked after them. And one of my friends grew up in Harlem, and his parents shipped him off to a school in another part of Manhattan so he wouldn't be subject to the gangs and the violence and all the rest of that stuff going on in Harlem. And he entered a pluralistic society at his school. There were Asians, and there were Jews, and there were Protestants, and there were all kinds of different kinds of people. So what was it? That that West Indian culture had the same kind of societal kinds of beliefs, like getting ahead, telling your kids that it wasn't good enough to be a victim. You're going to be prejudiced. People are going to be prejudiced against you, but you got to go out there and fight. And this guy is a wonderful friend, and he's dated white women and Asian women and Black women, and he's an IT guy, and he introduced me to his mom. Unfortunately, his dad was dead. And she took one look at me, and I took one look at her, and I said, "Hi, Mom." And she said, "Hi, son." And so I don't care what people say about color blindness. She was colorblind. She just saw somebody who loved her son, who she knew instinctively was going to be a caring person who didn't give a hoot where she came from, but cared about who she was.
I'll throw another word out: dissent. Dissent used to be something we protected. I remember the left saying dissent is patriotic. But in order to talk out on these issues and say, I'm not going to use the pronouns, no, speech codes at schools are wrong, to say, no, colorblindness should be, what we're doing is dissenting from what is now being taught in schools and through the media and through entertainment as the norm. And we are told you can't dissent, and we're canceled. We are canceled. There's a anvil hanging on a thread above us, and if we say the wrong thing, our lives are over. Our employment is over. This is North Korean kind of speech codes that I remember the left were the ones that protected us from this. The ACLU, who went to bat for evil people like Nazis in Skokie, Illinois, because even they had the right to say offensive things. But now we are going to silence you. And I am surprised how many people, particularly on the ideological left, are okay with this and, in fact, exploiting it because it goes in, I guess, their direction, not knowing it could go in a different direction. If the moral majority got control of the media and entertainment, well, I'm guessing they wouldn't like that too much.
This is an amazing time in American history. I'm on the board of the National Museum of Natural History, the Smithsonian, and
Isn't that what that pin is about?
Yes, this is the Smithsonian Institution. It's a little gag inside of the Smithsonian. Kirk Johnson runs the Smithsonian. Brilliant man. He's Mr. Nova now. I mean, you see this guy on television. He's quite charismatic. He could be the next Richard Attenborough. And if you said that to him, he said, oh, yeah, I've been in Richard's house in England, in Cotswold or wherever that devil it is, and he's got the greatest fossil collection. I mean, the guy is fabulous, right? But he's visiting me, and I said, oh, by the way, our board meetings are the first Wednesday in April and November, and I'm not coming to DC because the first Wednesday in November is the day after the election. And unlike some people, I believe that I'm just as much at risk of being involved in riots if Donald Trump wins the election or loses the election. And he looked at me like there was something wrong with me at first. Like, oh no, you mean that the far right will riot. You don't mean the left. And I mean the left. I think they are just as dangerous. Extremism is extremism wherever it comes from. And so apparently a whole bunch of other board members, because they really are smart people, said the same thing, and we moved our board meeting to the middle of October.
Let's wrap it up with this. I'm in a unique position. I can say what I want to say. And I've even made a living out of it. You are in a unique position because you have made your own wealth. And so your job is, what do we say to people who are working for a living, in school for a living, have to go out in the real world and deal with the speech police out there who demand that you identify people in 64 different genders and every different ethnicity, that it's your job to understand that. What do we say to them to make it easier and give them the strength to stand up?
There are 10,000 school boards. There are tens of thousands of local polities. Don't think you're powerless. Get out there. Get out there and get in front of your school board. And if one of you doesn't get their attention, show up with 10. And if 10 doesn't, show up with 100. We all have the power of American democracy. We are the voters of this country. Don't vote for people who are anti-freedom. Make up your mind now to do this. And maybe the first time you won't have an impact. Maybe it'll take 10 times. But ultimately, if you build a big enough coalition of people who say enough is enough, we're not going to stand for this, then you've got some cultural and maybe even political clout.
The whole Bud Light boycott proves you are not alone. You are not odd. You are not evil. It is a beautiful and powerful thing to work towards a colorblind society, not a society of checkboxes. It is a magnificent thing to work for the idea of meritocracy. And yes, there is a cost, and that cost will be ridicule. That cost could be cancellation, but it is so worth it. You want your children to see, I am not going to lie in order to keep this job. I am not going to lie and do doublespeak.
And people like us have to tell the stories. We have to tell the stories that illustrate this. Can I give you one more story before we're done? I'm working on the West Coast, on the East Coast of Africa with a marine team, because I am the science nerd of the world, and I'm actually doing marine research, even though I don't have a degree in that particular science. And part of the team is a guy who's incredible. He's from Nairobi. His father is Kenyan and his mother was British. So he is half white and he is half African, right? And he gets a full ride to Harvard. This guy's brilliant. And he tells me the story while we're off on a sandbar, far, far from civilization, no cell phone service, no nothing. It's wonderful stuff. And he tells this story how he's approached by a bunch of African-American kids about ethnic studies. And they come up to this very handsome African guy, and they say, we want you to join us in ethnic studies. And he says, oh, what's it about? And they tell him, and it is very, very racist, actually. It's anti-white. That is racism. And he looks at them and he says, well, why me? And they look at him like, well, you're "You're black." He said, "No, I'm not." And they're stunned. He said, "First off, I am half white and I am half black, and nobody gets to tell me who I am." David Obura, a brilliant, brilliant scientist.
I believe identity politics will destroy this country. That when you get ahead and by slicing us up and talking about our differences, that is a way to destroy what brings us together under these ideas of a colorblind society, ideas of individual liberties, ideas of private property and free choice. And that's what this is really about. This is not about pronouns and transgendered silliness. This is about socialism.
So call me a Pollyanna, but I think identity politics will self-destruct. It is so toxic and poisonous. It will poison itself ultimately. American public is going to rise up and recognize that if we continue down this path, the object of this lesson is to destroy American limited republic. It's not a democracy, it's a limited republic. Destroy our politics and destroy our culture. And I think America, before this happens, I know, call me a Pollyanna, is going to rise up and say, enough is enough. We're not going to tolerate this. And vote with their money, right? They're going to vote economically and they're going to vote politically to try and get rid of this. How's that?
I hope you're right. Ed, always thanks.
If you enjoyed that conversation, by all means, click one of these other great programs. We have the best conversations with the most fascinating Coloradans. And subscribe to our channel. Just click down below and hit that little bell button too. You don't want to miss a single show.